All right, how's that? Does it sound good? Okay, wonderful. Um, just to start out, just letting you know that our cohort is taking applications over in the corner. So if you're unhappy with your Buddhist home, um, I promise you you'll have a really good time with us. We have a really good time. We do. We talk about like one of the values is pluralism, but I think we do really good pluralism. Like I think, you know, um, whatever you have, bring it along, and we'll make it dharma. That's everything is dharmic, depending on the framework you use. Um, but yeah, so welcome everyone to this land. Again, I'm Lama Rod. I use he, him pronouns or they as well. And I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Creek, Cherokee, and Muskogee people and caretakers of the land that we call Atlanta in Georgia, which I drove straight here from Atlanta this morning, which is not a big deal for me, just 11 hours. But you just kind of zone in, you go into samadhi, you'll be here in a second. So, and I used to live kind of in this area too for several years. I have family in Northern Virginia as well, so I'm a little familiar with the DMV. I'm so really grateful to be here with everyone, with you all. This is such an important time to be in community with one another, right? This is such a potent and profound time that we find ourselves in, right? It's not just apocalypse and systemic collapse and fascism and all these big words we like to throw around. It's more than that. You know, is this is a chance for us to really choose liberation, right? Instead of choosing to cover things over, right? For the next generation to figure it out, you know. But this is a time where, when I say apocalypse, right? For me, the apocalypse isn't necessarily the end of the world, but it is an ending, right? I think it is the unveiling of real truth, right? But when you unveil real truth, particularly truth that you've been running away from, hiding away from, the unveiling of that truth can feel very violent. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to understand that, because it feels so hard, you know. And because so many of us, right, have been working so long, many decades, we've been spending many decades of our lives working to be of benefit, right? To help people, to help ourselves, to help our communities, to disrupt certain systems and institutions of harm and violence. And I think the problem with that, if I can offer some feedback, is that I think we got really kind of attached to how that liberation was going to happen. And when I say we got attached to something, I mean we got attached to liberation coming really smoothly, right? You know, like, something smooth, like, like a surprise party, right? Surprise, surprise, no more patriarchy, surprise, end of capitalism, you know. But it's hard for us to understand that this kind of change that we've been working for and praying for is going to take a lot of discomfort and a lot of loss, right? That is the medicine of the truth, right? But when I think about this in more of an indigenous framework, I think about balance, like we're coming back into balance. you know, and we're way off balance. We're way over here, and we're having to do this intense labor to come back. But that labor means that we have to process and metabolize a lot of trauma, collective trauma, individual trauma, transhistorical trauma. Like, it means that many of us will have to die. Now that kind of hit you, right? It's like, I'm not talking about, oh, I have to sacrifice myself, because that's another trip that we go off on as well. This isn't easy. This is very complex, right? But when I talk about dying, we always take it to the extreme. It's like, I have to give up my life. No, when I talk about dying in this context, what I mean is that all the things we think we are, that has to die. Right? Whoever you think you are needs to be laid to rest and memorialized. Right? And a tombstone must be erected. Here lies the person I thought I was. May they rest in peace. And now may I open to what I am. Right? To the remembrance of what I am. Not this performance of what I think I am, but a remembrance of what I am, right? And I think this is the project of Buddhism and Dharma, to remember. This is a project of remembrance, right? Because we got distracted and look what happened. We gave rise to a narrative, a world, a reality that's just cycles of suffering. And we don't have to be complicit or consent to it, but we do, right? Because we've gotten distracted away from what we are, right? And so now it is the practice, it is the path of letting go of this distraction and returning back, right? And that returning back, I think in Buddhist terms, is actually the practice of relaxing. Right, so here's some good news. To get free, you just have to relax. But that's hard. Right? Because we're contracted, we're shut down, we're condensed, we're knotted, right? And it's created this pressurized experience. And we've begun to identify with this pressurized experience and calling it a self or an ego. Like, this is who I am, right? And who I am is just this bundle of impressions, thoughts, feelings, emotions, right? Misunderstandings, right? But we don't know how to get perspective because we're so tight around this and in it. And so when we're starting the Dharma path, when we're actually going through the program, this is why I call Buddhism the program, right? When you start the program, the program is actually asking you to actually open, to relax, to surrender, to return back to fluidity, right? To return back to mystery, right? To not knowing, right? To return back to considering that everything is just this illusion, right? And the point of the program, right, is not to disappear anything, right? Because the program says that it's not the thing that's the problem. It's our relationship to the thing that's the problem, right? And when we're so self-identified with everything, that's the problem, right? So the program, in asking us to relax, is actually asking us to transform, to disrupt these habitual relationships that we have to phenomena. Like, what's really going on? What is my relationship to what's going on? Right? And how can I get clear about all of this complexity, all of this misunderstanding? How do we start getting clear? Because we're not clear. But the great thing about apocalypse is going to get you clear, right? Which is going back to the beginning and saying, well, this is such a fortunate time for us, you know? And that's a hard statement because, look at the suffering. Look at the genocides. Look at the war. Look at the president. you know, right? Just look. You know, right? And how can you look at this chaos, this violence, this neglect, I just say meanness. I just think people are just fucking mean. I'm sorry, I used the profanity. Yeah, no, you probably won't be thanking me by the end, because I'll just get carried away. you know, I come from cussers. Long line of cussers. But how do you look at, you look at this, you're like, how is this a blessing? Well, it's getting us clear, right? Because really the path, the program starts with suffering. But more so, the program starts with us saying, you know what, there's got to be something more than this. Right? This suffering, there has to be something else. Right? That's when the program starts for you. When you say, you know what else? Right? And so this moment is asking us to make a choice. Am I done with this? Right? And if so, am I willing to engage in real awakening, real struggles to get clear? Right? I came to Dharma, I came from activism, which is a very interesting story. A lot of practitioners, or I would say even more specifically, a lot of teachers didn't start in activism, which I think explains why I do what I do, because activism was my first path. I was like, the world is real messed up. And I just felt at a very early age that I had to do something, right? In a way, I was like, I need to be very active in saving my life and the lives of others who are being targeted, the communities that I come from and identify with. I need to be a part of disrupting systems that unfairly, unjustly target people who look like me, right? And so that was always a very strong experience. I guess I would call it compassion, So, I mean, I'm not saying I'm special, but in a way I am, just to have that downloaded at an early age. So I was very interested in social justice. I think maybe it frightened people, but I was just like, this is it. Like, I want to commit my life to activism and change work. As I grew older, particularly getting into my 20s, right, I was confronted with a lot of dilemmas, right? And one of the dilemmas was that I knew that there was something else that I needed to address. Like, I was very busy in the world, organizing, disrupting, protesting, everything, feeding people, housing people, all of that. I love that, but I was like, but there's something else though. There's a deeper question that's beginning to drive me. And I started looking inward and I said, oh, there's violence in my heart, in my mind, there's real suffering. And I felt like until I addressed the suffering, and really dismantle that, or began to dismantle this, right, I would always potentially recreate this violence in the world, right? And that's what that question, of like what's really going on for me in my mind and in my body, that really opened the door for me. It transformed my activism, And I said, okay, I am going to try to understand the mind and my body and the heart and love and compassion. And that became really cliche for many years, which I'm very much afraid of cliches, except the funny ones. But like, but just like, I just get tired of people just throwing out cliches as if that's the solution. It's just like, you just have to love. That sounds easy, sounds great, but I wasn't really seeing a lot of that. But what I became concerned with was the practice, the program of becoming love. Like that was it. How do I become this thing instead of talking about it? Instead of weaponizing it as a cliche to make myself look great, like a good Buddhist. What does it mean for us to actually embody real love, right? And that embodiment of real love meant that like I had to actually learn to love myself, to accept myself, to hold myself in the deepest care. And when I started doing that early on in my practice, right, when I started really attempting that, I began to see this transformation in how I moved through the world, right? It wasn't, after I started this practice of love, of, loving kindness, metta practice, benefactor practice, or the terms that we have for this, once I started those practices, my relationship to the world began to change, and like my activism began to change. Of course, my practice began to change, right? I stopped always trying to do stuff, and I just decided to be in the world, to be love, right? To hold people, right? Unconditionally, right? It doesn't mean that like I like people, because my early practice, really helped me to understand, and this is the help of my teacher, where it was like, no, the problem I was having is that I always felt like I had to like people as well, and there were people I just wasn't going to ever like, right? But when I started really investing in love, the ethic of love for me was like, no, everyone deserves to be free, period. Right? And if I can't hold that ethic, then I'm not practicing love. But when you turn it back to yourself, it's like, do I deserve to be free? That was the real question. Do I like myself? Right? Because I think you have to like yourself. You don't have to like other people. But I'm kind of here, And how do I like myself and love myself? How do I really choose to practice freedom and liberation? Do I deserve to be free? Do I deserve to be free from suffering and violence? Do I deserve to, I don't know, to experience care, compassion, right? Do I want that for myself? Because if I can't want that for myself, how am I going to want that for others? So early in my practice, like as all this stuff was happening, I realized, oh, love is actually like, this is important. I can't bypass love and help people get free. Like love is freedom, right? And that began like all the work, right? All this work over the 2 decades plus of practice has been this project of deepening the deepest love for myself in order to deepen love for others around me. Right? And it's not just the love of people, the love of self, but in a real Vajrayana sense, right? It is that we have to love everything. Everything must be loved. And when everything is loved, everything is set free. Right? So when I talk about phenomena, right? When I talk about the phenomenal reality, just the chair, the floor, whatever, the building, when I say you have to love that, I mean that you have to You have to hold everything in a way that releases phenomena from our deep misunderstanding of it, which begins to disrupt the illusion of realness, right? When I'm loving, I'm just holding space. I find myself just allowing things to be. And when things are just allowed to be, then there's a space that opens up for us to respond, not just react, but to respond, right? Because there's space that opens up for us to actually say, you know what, this is how I'm going to be in relationship to this. This is how I'm going to make a decision, right? And I'm going to make this decision with a lot of clarity and a lot of care. You can't get that often when you're just reacting, right? So even going back to this moment right now, it's like I talk about, yeah, this moment being such a blessing. Well, this moment is teaching us how to respond, right? And this is the hardest work to do, is to disrupt reactivity and come back into a place of response, right? And in that place of response, we realize not everything is going to get saved. Not everyone's going to make it. All the work is not going to get done. I'm not going to be able to do all the work, right? And when you're in that space, you also open up you enter into the real experience of grief, brokenheartedness, which I think is this is the character here that I think we're not naming collectively: the grief, the brokenheartedness. And when I say brokenheartedness, I talk about this fundamental brokenheartedness, which I define as just this disappointment. This isn't what I want. Ultimately, this reality, samsara, this is not what I don't know why I'm here, right? There's got to be something better than this, but here I am. Here we are in this experience of suffering together. Like, how do I disrupt that? And I think that's the fundamental brokenheartedness, right? And I think we're terrified of that, right? Because to be in relationship with phenomena as it is means that we have to first begin to negotiate this layer of brokenheartedness that keeps us from actually being in relationship with phenomena as it is. It keeps us from really telling the truth, right? I often talk about the earth here, the kind of the ground. And so this kind of analogy that I use is like, we think that we're treading the earth, walking the earth, we're moving on the earth. We think our feet, or somehow we're making contact with the earth, right? But I don't think we are. I think we're treading air. Right? When I say that, I mean that, like, I think we're living just in this narrative, this storyline that keeps us safe from the truth of things, right? And what's keeping us from touching the truth of things is this layer of brokenheartedness, this disappointment, and we won't get to the change that we need to get to until we let our hearts break. And as our broken heart, and as we move through that brokenheartedness, it slowly begins to bring us into alignment, to attunement with with phenomena as it is, with the world as it is, right? We can sit and talk about genocide and wars and famines all day long, but we're still very distant, right? Because again, there's the brokenheartedness that keeps us safe, right? But the work that we're being called to do in this moment is to move through that brokenheartedness to tell the truth about the violence, to feel the violence, to whatever extent is appropriate, right? To metabolize the trauma of this violence, not just put it to the corner and wrap it up and make it look pretty, and and write fun TV shows about it. But it's actually how can I develop a real relationship to the things that I habitually run away from, to the real violence, to the real ugliness, right? Because that will change you. There are certain identities that we cloak ourselves with because we think they serve as protections for us. Identities of privilege. They protect us, right? And there's a lot of hard work that goes through dissolving those identities to tell the truth, right? But these are things that the Buddha was talking about, The Buddha was like, you know what, we're going to meditate. Meditation is about telling the truth, naming the truth. Like, you can't get free from something that you can't name, right? That you can't touch, you can't investigate. To get free, you have to touch the thing that you're trying to get free from. And that feels frightening, right? And it's frightening not just because of the brokenheartedness, right? It's frightening because touching the thing that we're afraid of will change us. And are we ready to change? And of course, the question that's synonymous with that is, are we ready to get free? Like, you can't get free until you're ready to change, right? You can't change until you tell the truth, right? If you tell the truth, you have to be willing to die, right? There are parts of us that have to die. And this is what we're being invited to do. And I do believe that, like, this is going to happen, right? This is a very different period. And I think many of us we're here in our bodies in this world. And I think we chose to be here, right? I think if you're seriously practicing right now and choosing real liberatory paths of practice, then I think you have some intention to be here in this moment, because this is not easy, right? Like, this requires a different kind of dedication, a different kind of practice to continuously show up and to say, yes, I'm going to help. I am going to be curious. I'm going to go through this process, right? Because this is extraordinary. Right? This is an extraordinary moment, right? And if you're practicing, I just feel like there should be some rejoicing, but don't get carried away. Right? I think sometimes we're too hard on ourselves, right? And we don't take into full account what this moment is. Like, this is an intense shift in a world system, right? And we're here anchoring this shift, right? And the kind of activism, I think, is going to look very different. It's a kind of activism that we're going to have to invite our full selves into. It's not just you doing some shit for someone else. It's not, okay, showing up to the protest, showing up to the march, or signing a petition, or donating some money. These nice, comfortable things that we like to do. But this kind of activism is actually becoming. We have to become our most liberated selves, right? Because this is a moment where we're lifting. We have to start lifting, right? And are we ready to do that work? Because not everyone's going to make it. And that's another thing that we have to mourn. Some of us are holding on to too much. We're holding on to too many people. You can't force someone to get free who hasn't consented to getting free. Because if you try to get someone free who didn't ask for that, then we like to call that, I don't know, colonization. Like, I think we're really good at that. Actually, I'm gonna get you free, but I wasn't in bondage to begin with. But your freedom ended up with me being in bondage. So but again, like, and this is a wisdom, this is something that of course I wrestle with as well. It's like I can't force you to get free. I can't yell you into freedom. I can't do a whole bunch of social media posts to make you feel guilty. I have tried. And I continue. I can't yell you to freedom. I can't cuss you out to freedom. I tried that as well. That doesn't work. Um, I have to wait till you get ready. In the same way my teachers had to wait for me to get my shit together, you know? And that was the kindness of my teachers who were just like, listen, you're young. We're not going to force you to do anything. The practices, the teachings are here when you're ready, right? And that was one of the most important expressions of kindness and love that I've received from my teachers is that, like, when you'll be ready, but until you're ready, this may come off as really aggressive, right? And I say that to some of you because some of you come off as real aggressive, and sometimes that aggression is bypassing the discomfort of our own disappointment, our brokenheartedness. We want people to get free. Why aren't they getting free? Like, don't they know that they're working against their well-being? It's like, okay, yeah, no, they don't. And then what do? You grab them and shake them and say, whatever, I'm going to drag you to this, right? Or do we just attempt to embody what liberation looks like or what the struggle to get free looks like? And we practice patience and deep care and wisdom and say, when you're ready, I'm here. But in the meantime, I'm just going to be, right? And you may get inspired, you may not get inspired, right? But this is a time where we're also having to let go of all of our agendas, right? And we have to learn how sometimes to kiss the forehead of our most beloved folks and say, listen, I can't stick around anymore, right? Because what we're also doing is bringing about the new world. Like, I feel very confident about that. I'm very sure that this new world is approaching, right? And we have to, for those of us who are ready, we have to choose that new world. We have to choose to start bringing that about. And you can't keep pulling at people and at the same time try to invest energy in bringing this new world about. You have to choose one or the other, right? And this is, why I think the practice and the tradition of the Bodhisattva is particularly important, right? Because the Bodhisattva says, listen, I may not be able to get you now, but I'm going to come back. Because no one's ever lost, right? That's not in the program, But it can seem like beings get real lost, right? But that too is an illusion. So sometimes for some of us, maybe our contemplation right now is that, listen, I may not have all the skills and the patience to do the work of, like, really, really showing up for folks. But can I make the vow? Can I set the aspiration to one day be able to return back to the folks that I have to leave? The folks that, like, just won't choose freedom, right? That's not giving up. That's not bypassing. It's telling the truth, And as you tell that truth, you let your heart break and you mourn it. Not now, but later. I promise, right? Because I think this whole program is also like a pyramid scheme as well, like a mid-marketing pyramids like Lulura or like Amway. My family used to do Amway, so I'm very familiar. Um, but this whole middle marketing scheme, or the Buddhist version of the middle, the pyramid scheme, is that, we're not trying to necessarily save everyone, but we're just trying to inspire maybe one or two people. And then those people, yeah, you got it. You got it. you know and of course, with traditional pyramid schemes, the problem is that you run out of people, but beings are numberless. So this just keeps working on and on and on, right? The Buddha was a part of it. The Buddha came to this world system and attained awakening, and look, now we're sitting, in the Unitarian Buddhist Fellowship Convocation 2,500 years later. Something worked. You had a good marketing team, right? Yeah, so many of us are just terrified right now, and so much of my job right now, is to bring some context to this moment, to remind us that we're more than this moment, right? That we are expansive, fluid, limitless beings. And our suffering is really deeply rooted in the ways in which we get so rigid and static and singular, right? And oversimplified as well. And we have to expand, we have to open, we have to remember, right, like what we are, right? You have to remember the nature of suffering, which the nature of suffering is the nature of all phenomena, right? We have to continuously be invited back into that experience with emptiness and space and energy, right? Because if you're not balancing the realness of the material world with this kind of ultimate view, then this becomes it's too limiting. Like, when you lose the view of emptiness, then the material world, the phenomenal world, becomes carceral, right? It's trapping, it's limited, it's police, right? It's just one continuous cycle of suffering after the other, right? And that's the place of hopelessness, right? And one thing that, we don't talk about in Buddhist spaces is hope, right? Because hope takes us out of the present moment into the future and all of that. But I come from people who only had hope, you know? And I do believe that because there is impermanence, which is the law, then it is easy to say that there can be hope, right? Hope means that something will change, and something will change. And the more we get behind the change, the faster it changes, right? We can sit around and wait for enlightenment, right? Or we can do the program and speed the process up, right? Like, we use impermanence and hope in a really generative way. This is why we practice, right? So to be hopeful right now, right? That things are going to change, right? If we can hold on, like if we can hold on to our practice, hold on to community, hold on to remembrance of the wisdom of the land and the natural world, the wisdom of the waters, of the air, of all the elements, right? Because not only is this, a moment of coming back into balance or a moment of apocalypse, but this is also a moment of re-indigeneity, right? So not only are we remembering what we are, we're remembering our relationship to the unseen world, our relationship to the natural world, right? That we have been put in this position of dominating, controlling, surveilling, manipulating the natural world, which is very far from our indigenous ancestors' relationships, because we all come from indigenous people from somewhere in the world, right? You have to remember that indigeneity to return back to real sustainable relationship with the natural world and with the unseen world, right? Because these systems have created so much doubt, right, and disbelief, right? I'm not saying that all indigenous people, romanticize. I'm not romanticizing that and saying, okay, all indigenous people have the same belief systems about. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it was just more truthful. Like, right, it was more access, right, to this embodied experience, right? And we've been displaced from that. We've been disembodied, actually, right? And so this moment is an invitation to return back to our bodies, which is also returning back to the land, to the earth, right? So part of our activism for some of us is re-embodiment, right? Embodiment itself coming back, right? Having to negotiate, to metabolize, to clear the ways in which traumas have occupied our physical bodies while our psychic awareness, our knowingness hovers outside of this, right? To do this really radical work of returning back to our bodies, right? Which is also part of the program, right? And the Buddha was very skillful in demonstrating that, upon his awakening, as he was practicing, awakening, he completely bypassed his body, right? And it wasn't getting anywhere. He probably got further than we have, but and he came out of the samadhi. He was like, what's wrong with my body? And the body was like, listen, we're doing this together. Like, here you are down the road, and I'm here dying. Like, at some point, you have to invite the body back into the program, the wholeness, right? Because another understanding of love that I have is the complete acceptance of everything. You can't get free in fragments and in pieces. You can't put this piece over the finish line. You can't put the next piece over. Everything has to move into this awakening, this remembrance, the wholeness, the remembrance that we have always been whole, right? So the love is like the remembrance that I am whole. Even the things that I don't like, I am holding with this wholeness. Both the good and the bad, I hold together. That's what love is for ourselves, right? And love, and that kind of embodiment isn't about depletion either. Like, you can't deplete yourself into oblivion and call that liberation, which is complex, because actually this path is about being deeply resourced, right? And so we have to look at the ways in which we choose not to be resourced, because we feel as if somehow there's a moral, ethical kind of hierarchy around how much we choose to suffer in the work. The more I struggle, the better I am. The more exhausted I am, it shows that I'm really like dedicated. But we have to come back into balance. Some of us are saying, "Oh, I'm very resourced." It's the I have, like, I don't want to bring in the White Lotus into this, but I'm obsessed with that show right now. You don't get really good Buddhist media that's complex and thought-provoking like that, but that's another conversation, right? But some of you are thinking, oh, I've been very privileged. That's the problem. Well, yes and no, right? You can be surrounded by all this kind of really amazing food. That doesn't mean that you're nourished. You may be eating all the time, but it doesn't mean you're getting the nutrients and the vitamins that your body needs. I think we have a lot of shit. It's not the shit that we need, but we're confused about it, right? That's another confusion, right? Surplus doesn't mean that this is what you need. It just means you have a lot of shit, right? And the question we have to ask ourselves, do I have what I need to feel deeply resourced and nourished? Because you need a deep nourishment in order to choose death, or letting parts of our identities die and parts of ourselves die that are no longer necessary, that actually get in the way of our remembrance. Right? Depletion is a distraction as much as being over-resourced can be a distraction. So what's the balance? Right? Am I opening to what deeply nourishes me, which allows me to be resourced enough to make choices to struggle? Right? And that's a question we have to all ask ourselves. Right? Again, some of these identity locations of privilege aren't that privileged. They're actually quite depleting. Right? So these are just many of the questions, right, that I have been wrestling with for a number of years. I was like one of the first Buddhist teachers to start talking about the apocalypse. I wrote a book. have a whole chapter in Love and Rage about it. It's documented, But no, it's and also, like, I do deeply benefit from this conversation of theology and Dharma, as well as someone who is in many ways planted in both worlds, right? As someone who's deeply engaged in liberation theology and the Black prophetic tradition, which is partially rooted in theology, right? So the theology is important for me, right, to access in my own struggle to get free, So yeah, I don't want to keep moving on, but I wonder if there are any questions or anything. So we just have like 10 minutes, and we'll do some practice tomorrow for sure. I wanted to open up with practice, but I just started talking, as I often do. And then all of a sudden, it's like an hour has passed and we haven't meditated, But practice is extremely important, just to say that, right? Meditation is my primary technology, if I want to use that intensely academic language, But you have to be a practitioner. This is the path of experience, not a path of intellectualizing. Right? We have to bring the practice out of the head into the body. You have to work the practice into your body, deeper into your mind. Right? You have to internalize discipline in a way that you just stop thinking about practice and you just do it. Right? One of the things that you'll hear me say, is you have to eat the chaos. You have to consume the chaos, or the chaos will consume you. Right? And what does it mean to consume the chaos? Well, it means to practice. It means to offer space to everything. Right? Because the first the first thing that we're doing is allowing, right? Not condoning, not agreeing with. You skip too many steps. It's like this is the first stage of this is saying, yeah, this is happening. That's going to take you to the brokenheartedness. Yeah, this isn't. Well, this is a confusing statement. It is and it isn't a figment of my imagination, but it is real and it's not real, right? Both of those statements are very true. Okay, we'll open up to questions. See, that's what happens. I just keep talking. I get my legs crossed and, I'll get a cocktail menu in a second and then it's just like off to the races. Yay!
There. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I
Very
appreciate
special.
being here.
My name's Lori Stevens. I'm the minister from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. You talked about the world can become carceral depending on our relationship to it. And I'm wondering if that means the bodhisattvas choosing to return to it sort of transcends that imprisonment, because they're just like some of our civil rights leaders who chose to break the law and become jailed in order to find a deeper sense of justice and freedom.
Absolutely. I think when the bodhisattva chooses to return back to this carceral experience, it is an expression of deep agency. Right. This is not to say that the bodhisattva has complete agency, 100% agency, because this is still a dream. Right. So no being is going to have 100% agency here. Right. But when a being decides to come back, right, to return to places and sites of violence that they have escaped, that's a lot of power. To say, no, I'm choosing this, right? And so therefore, this is going to have a different impact on me being in choice, And that's going to create a lot of fluidity, a lot of openness. That's the magic of the bodhisattva, I would say, that agency. Like I'm not here trapped. I'm here because I chose to be here. Right, which is to say that there's a level of recognition of the dream or the illusion of everything, which begins to be a felt experience, a very subtle felt experience, but it's enough so that the materiality of the phenomenal world doesn't feel so permanent, right, and solid. It's like malleable. And this is what I wrote The New Saints on. So The New Saints is this very contemporary retelling of the Bodhisattva vow. And so the modern Bodhisattva is the new saint for me. Yeah. And that's something, the new saint, we have one more question in the front here. So the new saint, for me is just a new, it's a new framework that feels a little more honest and direct about what we should be doing right now. Because the Bodhisattva tradition, if you read some of the literature, is real kind of lofty and romantic, and the Bodhisattva will do this and that. So the Bodhisattva isn't necessarily like a Marvel superhero, which is how literature sometimes comes off. Walking through walls and, turning water into wine, but actually the bodhisattva, the primary, I would say, magic of the bodhisattva is caring, and doing the work to get people free and returning back to that work over and over again. They're returning. I think that's the hardest part of the bodhisattva work, is like you vow to continue to return over and over again. And of course, the traditional vows say that you keep returning until all beings are free from samsara, which won't happen. And my teachers knew that. And we would chant the bodhisattva prayers in the monastery when I lived in the monastery, and they would be so like irritated sometimes. These Tibetans. I'll be like, "Why y'all so irritated?" He was, and our teachers would be like, "Well, because that's not the case." But you can't take it so seriously like that. The Bodhisattva vow is meant to deeply internalize discipline so that you forget that beings are numberless. You just do the work. And when you lose yourself in the work, which is the cultivation of wisdom and care, or compassion and wisdom, or I say care and clarity, which is just words for compassion and wisdom. So you're cultivating these two experiences. And that happens when you lose yourself in the work of getting beings free. And then before you know it, you become freer, and that freeing begins to impact all these other beings around you, right? Because no one being can liberate all beings from samsara. If the Buddha didn't do it, you ain't going to do it. If Dr. King didn't do it, you ain't going to do it. If Harriet didn't free them all, you ain't going to free them all, honey, But that doesn't mean you don't try and do it. Exactly. Exactly. Like, because they did, look what happened. Right. And you just say, okay, I'm just going to do what I can. This feels small, it feels insignificant, but I'm still going to do it. And just do it. Right. And have this faith and trust that like you're awakening other folks, other beings to take up the work as well. And I think that should be the focus. Yeah, you still vow to free all beings. And at the same time, there's a deeper understanding that says, I'm not. Right? But I'm not going to stop. Right? That exhausts all of the doubt when you get through that. Right? You just do it. Right? And then you cycle out. Right? And then other beings take your place. And that's how the cycle works. Okay, I know we have one more question. Oh no!
You might have talked her out of it.
You didn't forget. You're someone to ask it. You know it. Do it. Do it.
I feel like that was so big and mine is so little.
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What is it?
So I'm Sabrina. Like I'm not I'm just a person. I'm just a teacher.
Me too.
But okay, so
I'm a person.
I've not actually had a teacher. I listen to Jack Kornfield all the time and read Pema Chodron and everything. And I've been meditating every night since just before Christmas. Okay. And I understand this idea of, placing yourself in the mouth of the biggest demon, you bring yourself back to your breath, but you also let yourself sit with those difficult thoughts. And in the actual functional practice of that, like, do you have thoughts or advice or like your experience and like, so these thoughts that come back, do I literally like follow them for real for a while until they're done? Or do I still bring myself back to my breath? Like, I don't know.
And you're a new practitioner. You're a new meditator. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like really good. This is a really basic, good new practitioner question. This also means that you're practicing to have a question like this. So like, this is great, right? In my work, and those of you who have done things with me know that like I am very much into being resourced in practice, and which we didn't do practice tonight, but tomorrow I'm gonna move you through a kind of like grounded practice that really calls in different elements to support us, right? And so as you're like following, being with thoughts, holding thoughts, there's a lot of like tough stuff that arises, right? But I need to feel grounded and held in order to open up to the bigness of this. And this is why we touch the earth. We do a lot of earth-based, grounding practice before we get into meditation, in my community, right? And when I feel grounded by the earth, I feel really resourced to hold space for big things that move through my practice, right? But I guess even more specifically to your question, I mean, it really depends on the kind of practice you're doing in the moment. But for me, when you're just holding space, you're just watching, right? But I'm not following anything. I'm just noticing what comes and goes, like feeling the rootedness of the anchor of my body or the earth, right? And letting things just be there. Mhm.
Yeah, but your mind secretes thoughts at all, right? Like that's the thing that Jack is saying in a lot of the episodes I've been listening to. And even as I sit there and let it be, like, some of these, most of the time I can be like, oh yeah, that's me being worried, or that's, the grief coming back, or, whatever. But
Yeah.
there's some of them that won't stop.
Yeah, then you're not trying to stop it.
So it's okay to go with them. Like I don't have to stop and bring myself back to my breath necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always is always, is always coming back to being present, right? And so when you find yourself distracted, wondering with something, right? If you know you're doing that, then that's the practice. If you don't know you're doing that, you're not practicing.
Okay, so if I know I'm doing it and I'm choosing to do it because I would like to exhaust it, like making a conscious decision,
Yeah.
then that still counts as the practice.
Yeah, but I think that's, you have to be careful about having too much of an agenda. Just like you let that go, it's just like there's a thought. It may go away, it may not. Like letting go of preference. It's just the natural mind is just arising spontaneously, right?
Yeah, I think I just need more practice.
I mean, yeah, this is why we practice for years and years. Like I didn't understand this until well into my meditation practice. I hated meditation actually when I started practicing. I was doing it because all the cool kids were doing it. It was peer pressure. Everyone's doing it. I was like, I guess I'll do it, and hated it. And I just kept coming back. That's the returning. You just keep coming back. It's boring. It's monotonous. You have to let go of like wanting to feel good and wanting to be rewarded and seen. Like you will confront all these conditionings that have been used to get us to produce things. And you're going to be cutting through that. Right. And then you're just sitting, watching, allowing, experiencing, letting go of agendas, letting go of fixing everything. This is the first level. Like this is where we start, I would say, in like mindfulness, or we would call it calm abiding, meditation, shamatha. You're not trying to figure out what the mind is. You're just trying to notice how the mind is working, right? You're just watching. Whatever comes, comes. Whatever happens, happens. That kind of attitude. With lots of support.
Wow, I'm looking and it's a little after 9. Should we break Lama Rod for the day and have folks come back tomorrow with more questions, or?
Yeah, we'll have more. Was there another question? Did you have a question, Cheryl? Let's do that. Let's do Cheryl. Can we do Cheryl's question really quickly?
Okay.
Since that was the
Microphone
last.
on? Okay. I was a trans activist in the 80s when people could barely spell it.
What was that?
I was a trans activist in the 80s when people could barely spell it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Lots of people have come out in droves over the last 40 years. Do you ever suffer? Do you ever experience bodhisattva regret? Did I do the right thing by doing that?
I'm going to say yes and no. I would say yes. I would say no, I don't regret it because this is the only thing I could possibly be doing with my life. But there are times where I could be like, God, it would be easier. Like, I wish that sometimes I could take a break because I'm on. Like, when I say saying yes and showing up to the world, I am always showing up to the world. And sometimes, no matter how much I binge on the Netflix, right? Like, I'm still in tune with it. And sometimes I just like need a break. But this is why the emptiness work is so important for me. Like, I have to touch into emptiness to feel a little more spacious and restored, you know. But no, I don't. We can't regret it. The Bodhisattva can't regret. But that means that when we make the choices to show up, to get free, when we make these vows, we do it fully with as much consent and awareness as possible. You're not doing this because someone else is doing it. You're not doing it because your friends are doing it. You're doing it because you understand that this is what you need to be doing to get free. Because if you don't have a solid consensual choice, then you're going to end up resenting the choice down the road. You're going to be like, oh, I only did this because like my husband was doing it, or or my partner, or whomever. I was doing this because my friends got into it. No, it's like at the end of the day, when it's hard, for me, when it's hard, I take refuge in the fact that I chose this. Like, I chose this. No one forced me to do this. You have to understand that like that can be a really intense source of refuge. Right? I chose to do this, and I know why I did it, even though it's really hard. Right? I chose this, and stand on that, be in that choice. Right? And that's going to, you talk about people coming out, like, we have relied on people making that choice over and over and over again because they showed us what was possible. Right? Even though it's hard. I'll just say this to wrap up. I was just in dialogue with Angela Davis in November, right after the elections, and it was really hard because we didn't really expect the elections to turn out like that. So we thought we would be a little celebrating a little bit, but nope, that's not what we were doing. And of course, Angela Davis was like, "Listen, I didn't know what to tell you. Like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, we've never seen this." I was like, "But I'm expecting you to give us the answers." Like, but like, I bring her up because it was like, no, like, look at you, like, look at what you did to inspire so many of us, like the loneliness, the violence, like the way that she fought and the way that so many people supported her. But like, you have to understand that like when we're so isolated and out front and looking around and going, where's everyone else at? Like, am I the only one making this decision to get free? Like, you have to really take refuge in why you chose this. Because the more you choose liberation, the fewer and fewer people you're going to notice around you. Right? So just hold that. And knowing that you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for many people who are watching you. You may not notice that they're watching you, but they're watching you. It may be your kids, it may be your grandkids, family, whomever, community. There are people who are relying on you to tell the truth and to struggle because you give them hope. And that keeps me going as well. There are people who would not be in their practice if it wasn't for me doing what I do, right? But that means I have to take refuge in my practice every day right? I don't practice because of you. I practice first and foremost because of myself, because I want to be free from suffering. And you have to want that for yourself first. And everything else is pretty, it gets real clear. It gets real clear after that. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everyone. It's over. You got everything. All right, now you're free.